welcome to this week's edition of 5 Things to Know for Tokyo 2020. In this week's edition, I'm going to cover some of the recent news because it is worth talking about, and it's only one thing: what is happening with the Tokyo 2020 Olympic Games. So let's go ahead and get right into it. If you recall from last week, a firestorm was set off when a report in the Times from an unnamed or anonymous government source said that the Tokyo 2020 was effectively just about being concluded that it was going to be canceled. It was met very, very swiftly with denials and rejections of that, in addition to many agencies, the government of Japan, the Tokyo 2020 Organizing Committee, and the IOC all saying that that was not the case and that there was no other plan than continuing with the Olympics. And since that article and since that time, there's been article after article about all the different possibilities that could happen, what the timeframes are, what we're looking at. I'm going to walk you through 3 scenarios that I think are the most likely. Now, these are not in any specific order, but these are the 3 scenarios I think are most likely to happen. And I'll talk about the period of time in which we might expect to see them over the coming weeks and months. So let's get on to that first one. That first scenario is a scenario in which the Olympic Games are closed to spectators. Similar to how we've seen with NBA basketball last year with the bubble, there could be a similar situation that presents itself at Tokyo 2020. This is a potential possibility that's being talked about and I'm sure has been planned out. So that's one of the scenarios. Let's talk about the next one. The next scenario is a scenario that does include spectators, but it includes spectators that are only residents of Japan, or those who are living or are residents or are citizens of Japan and are there locally in the environment and do not need to travel to get there. That's something that's being talked about. That's something that's been looked at. We've actually even seen some articles around that. That is another possible scenario depending on what is happening with the pandemic and what progress we make between now and time when decisions have to be made. So let's move on now and talk about that third scenario. The third scenario is that not only are the athletes there in Tokyo 2020 continues as planned, not only do Japanese residents are they able to attend the Olympic Games, but also international spectators are able to come. And I think as we think about that, one of the things I think is really important as we think about these different scenarios, and all 3 of them, they have varied likelihoods that I don't want to speculate on because I don't have any specific or inside knowledge on what's happening, is I think they can all happen in different degrees, right? You could have unlimited residents that are able to be spectators and have 100% capacity. So you could have partial, same thing with international. There might even be restrictions in terms of, no one's talked about it yet, vaccinations or, testing other types of countermeasures that are really, really critical to making sure that it's a safe and it's a healthy games, not only for the athletes, but also for the citizens of Japan. So, and I think the other important thing is these things don't all have to be decided at once. And if I were the committee and I were looking at, I'd be planning for all 3 scenarios, and I suspect they fully are. But as days and weeks and months go by, you'll have different points where these specific decisions may or may not need to be made. So as we look at these things, these are the 3, I think, the most likely scenarios that will occur over the coming weeks and months. And I know the world right now, and a lot of fans, I'm okay with a little bit of the uncertainty, but a lot of fans really just want to know with certainty, am I going to be able to go, or am I going to be able to, or am I not going to be able to go? And the same thing with athletes who are working their tails off day and night to prepare for this potential event. There also is one other scenario that I didn't talk about that was recently in the news. Let's move on and talk about that item. The last item I'll mention recently came out in the news in the US this week, and a politician in Florida suggested, hey, why don't we actually move the Tokyo 2020 Games in 2021 to Florida? And, it seems pretty ludicrous on the surface. And I'll tell you why. Is that not only is the amount of planning and time that goes into the Olympic Games that has happened, but there's quite an investment have to be made. If you look at LA 2028 specifically, there's over $1.1 billion in federal government spending for security alone that has to happen in order for that to take place. And so while it was likely a gesturing or pandering of that politician, and some people are saying, well, hey, is it possible or not? It seems like a very, very unlikely scenario, and I definitely would not place any bets on that particular scenario happening. So that's it for this week. I did want to spend a little bit more time breaking down the scenarios with Tokyo 2020, mainly because this is what you are going to continue to hear about in the news. I'm going to start moving into some other subjects. I'll touch on it a little bit each week if there are any changes. But again, it's going to continue to be loud and get louder and louder until there is some certainty about what exactly is going to happen, and we may not have that for a few months. The other thing I wanted to mention, I've started a new series called Everything About Olympic Ticketing. You can actually check it in the link here and actually start that series. There'll be a multi-part series that will walk you through everything that happens in the background and tricks and tips in terms of Olympic ticketing. So thank you for joining me this week. Looking forward to catching you next week.